How's it going, everyone? Nick from Comic Culture here. Welcome to another episode of Creator Conversation. Today's episode features Tony McMillen, a great indie creator that we met over in Heroes Con just a little while ago. Of course, I'm joined with Eric from 9 Panel Grid and Stu's Dr. Doom's Fan Club. So I hope you enjoy our conversation with Tony. Tony McMillen, man, thank you so much for joining us for our next episode of Creators Conversation. Really appreciate you being here. We saw you at Heroes Con about a month ago now with a lot of other people. But how was your experience at Heroes Con, man? It's been great seeing you there.
Thank you. It was great seeing you guys. Thanks for having me here. Honestly, that was like the best con I ever did, as far as money and as far as hangouts and as far as just good times. Like it was number one, and it's kind of cool to know that. Like I was like, I've had the first Heroes Con was really good too, but this blew it out of the water for me in every way. And you guys, honestly, not to just kiss ass, you guys are a big part of that. Like you guys talked about the book, and people came up to me and mentioned that, oh, I heard that on this episode about Atta Boys. Tell me about Atta Boys. Oh, great. Mm-hmm. And you guys came by about some original art and stuff and talked. It was awesome. And yeah, Heroes Con, I can't recommend it enough to people who artists who want to go, and also I think there's people who want to check it out. It's a great con. And I listened to the episode of Marty, and Marty put it really succinctly. Like it's a big con of little con energy. Yeah, and it's like a little con writ large. Sure. I'm like, oh, that's perfect. That's what it feels like, and that's great. That's what I want.
Yeah, it was our first times going there. Like, Eric, what were your initial thoughts? Like, just real quick, like you were just as blown away as the rest of us, I'm sure.
Yeah, basically. I mean, it was like the old adage is don't meet your heroes. Well, this is the hero you absolutely do want to meet because like it was fantastic. Yeah, like it was. Well, it wasn't even until day 3 that we really started long box diving on anything because like we were just having such a good time talking to like all of the creators, like you, Tony, specifically. Like it was all of that stuff that really made the whole trip so special, right?
Yeah. Stu, you definitely took advantage of the con too, getting up some great stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It was overwhelmingly awesome. Of course, had to pick this piece of original up from Tony.
Oh hell yeah, that's great.
Oh yeah,
my latest diss track for Sucker good. MC Richards. I love calling Richards a Sucker MC. I'm always here for that. And of course, I love Tony's Doom, man. Tony's Doom is so amazing. But yeah, second and third, what you guys all said, amazing energy, just with everybody. You know, I said it before in the previous episode, whether it was in line or at night or at the hotel or wherever it was, everybody was so happy to be there for the love of the game. So just an overwhelmingly amazing experience.
Yeah. And it was one of those things where like the three of us were planning like where we're going to go, we were going to see first, like all that stuff. Like we had all this nervous energy. We're trying to get out, trying to plan our weekend. And like we were all synced up on the fact that like, okay, Indie Island and that middle top area, we're going to be spending most of our time in that area because we get to meet awesome guys like you and just talk about the craft and talk about your books and stuff. And man, it was just such a great time. And to echo what Stu was saying, yeah, it's just one of those pieces as well. The I need girlfriends piece, which is, or we need girlfriends. It was so funny. I mean, like, bravo, man. It's such a crazy style.
Thanks.
Love it.
It's funny. It's the summer of Doom for me. I always loved Dr. Doom, but like I've been doing, people have been responding to it. I'm like, oh my, should I do like a Doom bootleg or something? Because like I love
the
Fantastic, Fantastic Four in general. Yeah, it'd be fun. Maybe I'll do like a Doom dating app thing. He goes on like something and tries to hook up, and it's like Namor's there. It's like, oh shit, like we have the same interest.
Yeah,
you know? Him and Namor are like always go together. So I think that's a great idea.
No, I totally agree. Like the first time when like he tries to trick Namor into taking over the Baxter building and stuff, and he's kind of like wine and dining him. It's Stanley and Jack Kirby. It's so funny the way they do it. Like it's very like vaudevillian humor. It's kind of broad, but I think it really works.
It always works. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well said.
That's so funny. That wasn't your first time at Heroes, right? You've been there a couple different times, or what was that?
That was the second time. So, last year I went, and last year was my first time. And last year, this time was the best time I had. But last year, it was such a splash in the face of meeting so many people. And I might have told you guys this in person, but like my experience last year, this happened like 5 times. I talked with somebody for an hour or maybe 2 hours, and eventually I go, "Oh, like, what's your name?" And then it'd be a legend who I've read since I was a kid, and that happened over and over again. It was embarrassing. Like my big story was a really tall guy named Steve I was hanging out with for like, we had breakfast together. We hung out for like, I think 5 or 6 hours. And he was kind of complaining that his table's out in the middle of nowhere. And I was like, that sucks, Steve, man. That's a bummer, dude. It just seemed like, it sucks for him, whatever. And eventually we're talking some more. I was like, Steve, like, what kind of stuff have you done? He's like, oh, I did Civil War for Marvel. I was like, are you Steve McNiven? He's like, I am.
McNiven?
I was like, why didn't you leave that? He's like, I don't know, Tony. I feel kind of weird saying I'm Steve McNiven. I was like, oh, dude. I was like, I know who you are. I was like, okay, cool. He's super like nonchalant about it. I was like, holy crap.
Yeah.
And that happened again and again and again. And I've always been bad at any sort of celebrity meetings. I have a long list of embarrassing stories. And with comic people, it's especially bad because I really should know these folks, but I don't.
No,
that's kind of like the nightmare of going to a con. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like walking around not knowing people, not knowing their faces.
Yeah, you see the name so much, you hardly ever see the face, so it's hard to find people sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And, like I'll tell you one more time, I'll leave it alone. This is pretty good. The first night, the first Heroes Con, I was hanging out with all the Cosmic Lion guys, and we're chilling at a table, and there's a few other guys there, and we're hanging out, we're drawing and having a few beers at the bar, and this older dude is kind of checking out our art, and he's like, oh, that's pretty cool, and we're like, hey, sit down, it's cool, and he looks kind of like R. Crumb. He's got like a hat, a mustache, big glasses, and he's a nice older guy, and we're just chilling, and he's kind of hanging out, doing some doodles, and like, I don't know, an hour and a half passes, and eventually I'm like, hey man, like so what do you do? He's like, oh, I'm mostly known for like for coloring. I was like, oh, anything I would know? He's like, Akira, Spawn, Sandman. I'm like, are you Steve Olaf? He's like, I am. I'm like, and this year I saw Steve again. I was like, hey Steve, I brought the story up to him. He's like, oh yeah, I remember that. That was great. I was like, cool.
Jeez.
Oh my God.
That sounds like a nightmare to like not really. Yeah. But that would be totally me though. Like not knowing. Same. There's some guys that are like undeniable, right? Some guys are like you know exactly who that is when you see.
Right. There's some people that they're kind of mini celebrity, like Rob Liefeld. You know him when he looks. He's done enough appearances outside of comics that you know what's up.
Yeah,
of course.
I had so many of those instances at Heroes that where I'd walk by guys' tables and be like, oh, that's what he looks like. You know what I mean? Like so many of those guys I hadn't.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
You know, one of the best things about Heroes Con, though, at least for me, was actually hearing that you had a Kickstarter that was looming for the latter half of Serious Creatures. I was so excited. It came out. I backed it immediately. But like, dude, like Tony, tell us, what's Serious Creatures all about, man? What can we look forward to?
Serious Creatures is pretty unique. So all 12 issues are done. And so this is the second trade, which is issues 7 through 12 collected. And there's also a bundle deal. You can get the first one and the second one with a little money off the top. But basically, it's a story of a special effects wizard who's a teenager who starts working in special effects in the 70s in Hollywood. It's based on the life of the career of Rob Bottin. And Rob Bottin was age 14 working on Star Wars. And he eventually did The Thing at age 21. And it's an amazing life. And so I took his career as a sort of template. And I thought, what's really cool is I always loved like movies like Goodfellas or Boogie Nights, where you take a weird kind of subculture of people and have like a multi-decade look at the rise and fall of an industry and an art form or anything like that. And I was like, oh, what's really cool about this is right in the 70s, you have Jaws hits, the blockbuster phenomenon begins, and this guy is poised to be right there at the beginning and up until CGI and Jurassic Park and kind of the downfall of practical effects. It's like, this is perfect. And making the story, it becomes really personal too. I put a lot of my own personal life in there, and it's a really surreal book. It's very literary. It's kind of coming of age. It's also, if you love movies, especially like monster movies and the special effects movies of the 70s and 80s and 90s, this is like nothing but Easter eggs and weird stuff. And I'm a huge fan of analogs. I love when The Simpsons, they don't do Michael Tyson, they do Jedrick Tatum. I love the weird, just a little sprinkle of weirdness. Yeah. So like instead of like American Werewolf in London, there's a Connecticut Werewolf in King Arthur's Court. Instead of Jaws, it's Finn. Instead of Return of the Living Dead, it's punk rock graveyard party, I think I called it. There's all these little twists and stuff like that. And it's a really, like I said, it's a really weird book. It's my most literary book, but I'm so happy it's done. I think especially the last half, which is what's being collected now, I feel like it's my strongest work. It's cool to finally have it all collected, and awesome. The whole saga is done, but it's pretty fucking nutty.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just picking up on like the personal moments in it. One of my favorite moments in Serious Creatures was when Bobby leaves behind the comic book to maintain that connection with his sister, and finding out that was based on a real life moment with you and your sister in Spawn #1. How cathartic, and you have moments. Yeah, absolutely, I loved it. And moments like that also in Attaboy with the mom and the dad. How cathartic has it been for you taking those past life experiences and traumas and putting it into your work?
I've been finding lately it is cathartic, but it's a cycle. And so I'll feel like a release and like, oh, I've exercised this. But as years go by, it kind of cycles back, and it's not. It almost feels like it cycles back, but it's thinner, or it's not as bad as it will just kind of keep going in this weird cycle. And like in fact, Attaboy, one of the big things about Attaboy was before I did comic books, I've written some prose novels, and my first novel was called Nefarious Twit. And it's a really dark book. The whole idea is that there's this guy named Nefarious Twit who's a kids book author, like a Shel Silverstein, and he abandoned his family, and no one's seen him for like years. So his son wants to find him and kill him after his mother commits suicide. It's really dark, and I kind of thought that was that was my angry young man novel. I'm over my dad stuff. I'm through. And then right before Attaboy, I became a dad. I became a father, and all of a sudden, all these old feelings and even deeper feelings of both my parents kind of came to the surface. And that was actually when because I had the idea for Attaboy, like the premise of a comic book disguised as a video game manual. I had that for a while, but I didn't really have a story. And then the next piece was like, oh, I had this character Attaboy. I was like, oh, cool. He's like a Mega Man. He's like an Astro Boy. Neat. But I still didn't really have much to say. And then becoming a dad and all those feelings kind of resurfacing. I was like, oh shit, now I have something to say. And it's really weird. I think about this this quote from Chino Marino from the Deftones, where he's sort of like he's like not saying it, but he's basically talking shit about Korn, who they're friends. But he's like, I don't want to do. He's like, I don't want to do like my 5th album still bitching about my dad. And I was like, whoa. Like,
and Jonathan Davis is like, whoa, wait a minute.
Motherfucker, I built an empire here. What are you doing? Don't ruin this for me. Yeah, but I know what he meant. Like I'm also a big Pearl Jam guy. And Eddie Vedder, like the first album, 10, is very personal. And he does move beyond that. And I think part of it is like, well, I can't just repeat myself. And also I think, he has other things to say. And I think it's smart because if you do nothing but like one subject of trauma, maybe that will get kind of, I don't know how much you can say about it, but at the same time, as the years go by, I do find myself thinking about these things differently and coming over. And what I am happy about is I'm 42 now. I feel like I have enough time and space to at least have more empathy towards anyone in my family or my life who I thought maybe wronged me. And not that I think everyone's hunky dory, but I'm like, okay, I do understand why these mistakes might have happened. I see my own mistakes. I see my part in these things. And I think it's good to have a little distance to kind of figure it out. Because, I think like most people, when something bad happens in the moment, you're like, fuck everyone. I'm like so good. Why is everyone doing this to me? What's going on? Why? It's hard to get that. You need a little distance, I think. Did I answer your question?
You're like,
sorry.
No, that was great. Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing like being a parent to contextualize everything about like what you thought of your parents and every decision that they made. Like it just like repeats in your head and you're like, oh yeah, maybe I should cut them some slack. Maybe just a little bit.
Yeah. And one of those things too is really, I became a parent, I think I was like 37 or something. My folks were like in their mid-20s. I was like, oh my God. Like I had... Yeah, it's terrifying. I had no idea. Like in my mid-20s, I'm already kind of a shamble of a person, but I was really rough in my mid-20s. There's no way. Yeah. I couldn't have a dog.
Same.
It's kind of like the worst time to be responsible for another human being, right?
Yeah,
like in your mid-20s. I was in my late 20s when our daughter was born, and I was just like barely conscious of the fact that like I don't know everything, and like even adults don't know what they're doing, and everyone's just trying to fake it till they make it. You know what I mean? So that is kind of funny.
Yeah.
I remember being at the hospital with my son thinking like, they're gonna let me leave with this thing? Are you kidding me? Do you know me?
They basically let us watch this video. It's like, don't let your kid choke. I'm like, right? And they're like, you're good now. I'm like, oh, the video. Okay,
and you're on your way.
Yeah, and I'm not a writer or anything. I've never tried to put any stories together, but like I'm always fascinated when people who do can actually pull those moments and those experiences out of their life and like keep the personal spots in there, right? Keep that connective tissue in there, but like add so much other flavor around it to make some kind of like a cohesive story. So like, as a creator, just props to you for being able to do that. Thank you. It's just so effective in the books that you make. And we were reading, of course, Attaboy was the thing that kind of got you on our radars. A lot of people probably are in that same boat, to be honest, and we're just kind of eager to like consume anything else that you're going to be putting out there in the future and going back in your catalog and pulling up some other stuff. So you just have a great way of pulling those personal experiences out and just making these beautiful stories and just around them. So, props to you for doing
Thanks,
that.
man.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we were talking about just kind of like with serious creatures being with like practical effects and things like that. There's something magical about the practical effects in the movies that came out in the 80s and whatnot. You spoke about Batman on a couple different interviews that you had and how influential that Tim Burton's like the first one, The Returns, was on like your style and maybe even like, you're growing up just in general. And I know that movie in particular for me was like the reason why I actually like started hanging out with my soon to be wife after that.
Sweet.
And so like it's got a really interesting place in my world as well. So like do you remember where you were, what your headspace was when those movies were coming out, and like how influential was that whole scene for you?
Yeah, I did like a 4-page comic about it because it was that important to me. But basically, I think I'm age 9 or maybe 8, and it's I'm staying with my Aunt Susie for the summer, and there's an aunt in Serious Creatures who's basically my Aunt Susie, and we're staying there, and Batman is inescapable that summer. It's everywhere. There's shirts, there's anything merchandise, everyone's talking about it. It's you cannot get away. There's the Prince videos. It's amazing. So I'm peak excited. There's no, and I already knew what Batman was to a point, but I remember seeing it in the theater, and I really remember like when him and Vicky Vale are falling from at the top of the building at the end. In my mind, is like this scene went on for 10 minutes straight. I was dizzying. I was enraptured. And so basically, after seeing that film, I was just really like, oh my God, that was like the greatest. That was my Star Wars moment. When people talk about the Star Destroyer, I didn't see that in the theater, so I didn't have that. That was my Star Destroyer moment. And then the cool thing is, since Batman was everywhere, The Dark Knight Returns is in all these bookstores, and that was kind of unusual at the time. And so my aunt and me were walking through a bookstore. I was a big reader. I saw this book and it looked amazing. And I saw Batman. He looked cool. I was into the Frank Miller art, and I was like, hey, can I get this? And she's like, oh, this is a legitimate book. Sure. And of course, it's nothing but like swastikas on butt cheeks. It's nothing but like weird dolls that explode. The Joker like kissing Dr. Ruth. It was over my head. It was really weird. And what I really loved was the artwork was very it kind of took me in and pushed me away at the same time, because it could be really dynamic and bold and beautiful, and sometimes it could be hideous and gross and crude. And I was really taken by that. And I think Frank Miller is definitely my biggest influence. He's still in me.
It's a great way to describe it.
Yeah, I think that part, sure. I was really taken by that. And I was really like, oh man. And after that, comic books became it, because I had read comics before and I liked comics, but seeing Frank Miller, seeing a real vision and a real point of view on The Dark Knight Returns, and it started to make me develop, like, I like certain styles and ways of telling stories better than others. And I read other Batman books, I'm like, this is okay, but it's not as good as The Dark Knight Returns. I don't know why. That was funkier. That was weird. Yeah. And that's what got me into that. And so that changed my whole life. And so it's really weird to kind of hinge that on a movie, but I'm like, yeah, it did change my life. It really did. That's kind of crazy.
That's amazing. I love that it was the confluence of those two things, like the movie and Dark Knight Returns. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. Yeah, I was telling Nick backstage, we had we had Batman on VHS, man. I just remember wearing that thing out. It was such an iconic movie, and it definitely he put Batman #1 for me until Wolverine came along. It was definitely.
Yeah,
it was growing up. My mom loved. Did you like Batman '66 growing up? My mom always put that show in my purview as well.
I actually dug it. I did know it was kind of goofy, but like they played it at Nick at Night and sometimes reruns and other things, and I was like, and actually my mom bought me the Batman '66 or '66 movie, which is like Batman the movie, and it's when he has like the bomb and it says bomb and he throws it, and there's like all the villains in it. And I thought that was great. Me and my brother would watch it all the time. Yeah, and especially as a kid, especially like a nerdy kid, back then you only had so many choices. So if anything was tangentially comic booky or what, I remember I watched Mantis, which would follow the X-Files, and that was not that good, but it had a guy in exosuit.
I love that.
Yeah,
no, I kind of love so
cool.
Mantis. Yeah.
The suit is so cool.
Funny. Every time I say this, people are like, "Dude, Mantis was legit." I'm like, "All right." But my point is, like, I wouldn't watch Mantis now. There's so many options, right?
Right.
Just because it's got. And in fact, now I'm more likely to watch something that does not have some sort of superhero-y thing, because I've just kind of done. But as a kid, I'd watch anything. Like, I remember the Guyver movie. I was like, oh, it's Luke Skywalker and it's like weird exos. Let's do it. I don't know what the Guyver is. Let me inject it to my veins. Anything.
Well, speaking of like Batman, which came out in '89 and all this different media, like the 80s movies, which like kind of course loom large over serious creatures, man. Like I know my answer to the question, but I'm really curious about your answer here. Like what makes 80s movies specifically like this like such a north star for creativity, like regardless of what you're looking at, like how it influenced other movies or specifically like comic books?
In my mind, there's this weird, especially the early to mid 80s, there's this thing where in the 70s, all the auteur directors are coming up in the 60s and 70s, and they're making their own very interesting films. And then some of them figure out, like George Lucas and Spielberg, they are making very personal films, but they figure out almost accidentally a formula or a recipe that is going to make mass appeal happen. Like Jaws, Close Encounters, and the first Star Wars, they're not really a calculated thing. They're genre movies with heart and soul, and they're not like trying to elevate anything, but they found a way to make these things appeal to everyone, and they did it authentically.
Yeah.
And then people figured out a formula, and so, but at first there's a good like 5, 6, 7 years of people who are kind of doing their own version of that. Where I really want to make the best werewolf movie possible, and you have John Landis do American Werewolf, you have Joe Dante do The Howling, and it's not a calculated thing. This is going to be awesome. You have Zemeckis and Joe Dante do Gremlins, and Spielberg's part of that. But it's not like, oh man, they don't have a committee going, okay, if we do this and make this cute, make this, it's going to work. It's authentically working, and it's got this mass appeal. And then eventually, of course, it does get kind of formulaic, like anything does, and people are just kind of plugging things in to make it work. And then by the end of the 80s, some of those things get played out, and it goes into the 90s. But I think there's this great period where they kind of, people are figuring out how to make really cool genre stuff that they care about, but isn't embarrassed to be about monsters or have cool effects or whatever they're doing. And there's all these visionary creators, especially those movies, like all these directors, like there's Cronenberg, there's John Carpenter, there's all these guys who are just one after another, like so good and so interesting and original and weird. And so I love that. And of course, I am biased. I was born in 81. This stuff, and I like other decades of films a lot, but this stuff is kind of what I was built on. And it's hard to separate yourself from things which kind of built your language. Like I still love Pulp Fiction, and Pulp Fiction was kind of my gateway into I guess more indie cinema, even though consider it now, it's like, whoa, it's weird, but it's not like as that weird really. And it's like, well, yeah, but things were influenced by. But for me, it was like basically the first movie I saw, which was like not exactly like the other Hollywood movies I saw. It had enough violence and stuff like that to be like, okay, there's some action, I get that, but I was like, what's happening here? And that'll always be special to me. And the same thing for like those early Spielbergs, early Lucas stuff, and then all the guys who fell in after that, and even stuff like Poltergeist. I'll rewatch Poltergeist, and it's so nostalgic. It's so like the cozy is getting thrown around a lot now, and it's a perfect word for stuff like this. It is cozy. So for me, I think that's why that stuff always speaks to me. And when I discover something I haven't seen from that era, I'm almost always like, oh yeah, finally another little nugget, another little 80s nugget. And like, and even stuff I haven't seen in a while. I haven't seen Wolfen since I was a kid. But like my buddy Dave Howlett was talking about Wolfen. I was like, oh my God, I need to see Wolfen. I used to watch Wolfen all the time. And it might not even be that good, but I'm like, oh man. And someone's bagging on Highlander 2. And Highlander 2 might be in the 90s at this point. But I was like, oh man, I want to see that. It's probably terrible still, but I want to see Highlander Part 2 again.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's funny. I think that 80s kids are just like a totally different breed because like you talk to some people as they grow up and they're like, I was an Aladdin kid and like I was a Labyrinth kid. And I'm like, I was a Big Trouble in Little China kid. Like,
right.
I mean,
because it's a good point too, is there is that forbidden fruit aspect. It's like before they realize, well, we can make these movies a little tamer and then moms will be mad and stuff like that. But yeah, I remember like, it's funny, half these movies we're talking about, there is one scene in each movie which did scare me that I would either fast forward or close my eyes. Even Batman, the part when Vicky Vale's is at the museum and Joker's there and Joker's like, creeping on her and she splashes water on his face and he's like, oh, my face is melting. And he turns around and he just says, boo. That freaked me out. I do not know why. Yeah. And then like RoboCop is the one that every guy I talked to is like, oh yeah, him getting executed. I can't, that was rough. And it was sadistic. And I remember watching it like this is like, I already saw Terminator at that point. It's like, no, Terminator does not get this mean. This is much. And so I used to like close my eyes like, all right, is he a robot yet? Okay, cool. Let's watch. We're back.
Yeah.
And then we all run to Kmart to pick up the toys for these things that they marketed for children.
Right.
It's crazy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was a shocking moment because like in Terminator, we all knew, okay, dude's a robot, dude's liquid metal or whatever version you're watching or whatever. But when you're actually watching Murphy like just getting blown away, that it's like, oh my God, this is the first time that they didn't try to like create that clear definition of like he's not really human, guys. It's okay. We can do these brutal things to him. And now we're gonna flip over to freaking RoboCop and just, blow your brains out.
And I remember being a kid watching it the first time going, how's he going to get fixed? How are they going to give his body back? Like,
Yeah, I think he's dead. I think the movie's over.
Yeah, I'm
right?
like, oh, that's it? He has to eat baby food forever? Baby food sucks. Yeah.
Oh,
that's
man.
what took me. That's what I took with me.
Dude.
Good Lord.
So, one of the other things we were talking about, and actually just before you jumped on here, we were kind of talking about a different art piece that you had, and we were all kind of in agreement. We're like, man, this feels really Frank Miller. So, like, I'm glad that you brought up like Frank Miller and the Dark Knight's influence on you.
Yeah.
But I was also listening to another interview that you had where you had talked about the fact that you have like intentionally tried to emulate other artists. Like you really tried to take like a Ramita approach or a Dicka approach on certain things, and how like you were kind of discouraged when people came back to you and you were like, man, your art is so original. Like, where do you come up with this kind of stuff? So I'm kind of curious because I think that's like a years, ago that you had that kind of statement. Where do you feel like your art has evolved to, and like, do you still take that approach, or do you have a different viewpoint on it?
I think so. What I was talking about is basically how, in a good way, I'm a bad parrot. I'm really bad, and I always, my analogy is always The Simpsons and Hank Azaria talking about like Mo the bartender is a bad Al Pacino impression, Lou the cop is a bad Stallone, but it becomes its own
Right.
thing, and I've embraced that. So yeah, there have definitely been things where I was like, oh, I was really going for insert anyone's name, and it didn't come off. And what I find now is and I think this is the way I'm going is I still have tons of influences. I'll look at things. I'll look at Mike McMillen and go, how does he draw all that? And then I'll try to do a version of it. But more often now, the lesson is really, it's cool that he does that in a weird way, and that's how he does that. And I'll just keep drawing something into, if I just kind of stumble onto something that looks, I'm like, I don't really know where this is from. I'm like, that's the direction, and I'll try to fine tune that. And I think that's the way to go. And it's funny, little things are things like that. Like sometimes I'll look at like Magnolia, for instance, the way he would draw a skull. Because I was like, I feel like all cool artists draw skulls in very special ways. Like, and that's like being a rock singer and saying the word "yeah." Like you say "yeah" a special way. Like James Hetfield, yeah. Lane Staley, yeah. Eddie Vedder, yeah. That's something. It's like almost like we all say it, so we can measure that against each other. So skull. I was like, I'm getting my skull. I've been putting glasses on skulls, so I have to figure out a way to not just do glasses on skulls. But I'm working on it. That's important. But now it's funny. Now doing comics for like 8 or 9 years at this point, the thing that's coming more and more to the surface to me is layouts and actual storytelling over just style, and that stuff is. It's funny. Like I was thinking about this just recently. I like a lot of kids in the 90s. I love Todd McFarlane. I really grew up in a lot of that stuff. And I did kind of move away from McFarlane. I was like, I really like some of the style and stuff like that, but I was like, oh, I actually think he's not that good at action choreography. It's a little too still for me now. And, the noodling's fine. He actually makes the noodling work, and almost no one else can make that level of noodling work. But and the things I think he actually excelled at too, which is he's really good at full on facial close-ups. Like he can do it well because he can do a level of detail that makes it look I guess satisfying and feel full. And he's also good at 3-dimensional big figures. Like in Spawn number 4, there's a 2-page spread where the Violators ripped Spawn's heart out, and Spawn's just standing there, and there's Violators up close to the viewer, and it looks breathtaking still. But basically, I was like, oh, I don't really like his storytelling, and I don't really like his action. I thought Eric Larson was much better at that stuff. But lately, I've been thinking about my own layouts. I was like, you know what? There is McFarlane in these layouts. There's some weird stuff I'm doing. I think it's at least the initial seed of that was McFarlane's weird layouts. And I think sometimes they can be really cool and really creative and really interesting. And I was like, okay, because I didn't really shed McFarlane. He's in there. He'll always be in there. And I guess that's kind of all these guys. Like I love Jay Lee, and Jay Lee is always going to be, and Jay, and Jay Lee. It's funny. A lot of these artists are like they're gateway drugs to other artists. Their influences. So Eric Larson's huge. He's my gateway to Kirby and the gateway to Walt Simonson. Jay Lee's my gateway to The Biz. Is my gateway to Bill Sienkiewicz, and even it's kind of the same era. But Tex used to do Ghost Rider. I think I saw Jay Lee first. And I was like, oh, this guy's kind of similar. And I was like, well, this guy was around first. All those guys do that, and so I think it's hard to shed all this influence. But lately, I've been really pushing towards basically making my own visual vocabulary. And how do I do that? Like Mike Mignola is the best example. Where I'm like, everything he does, like he can draw a set of car keys. I'm like, I know that's Mike Mignola's car keys. Yeah, no one draws it. Like, so true. Yeah, and it's like he draws a cup of coffee, he draws a cigarette, and it says certain lines. Like that's a puff of smoke he does.
That's the smoke that yeah.
And I'm like, that's the way to do it, man. Like I want that, and so I'm working towards that. And of course, the tricky thing doing that is that you have a really stylized way of drawing stuff. Sometimes you have to figure out, well, how do I do a car, or how do I do something very specific without, because I can draw something that looks a little more like Neil Adams or something that's a little more representational, but to do in my style, it takes some kind of tinkering sometimes.
Gotcha. You know, that makes total sense. And like, I mean, I truly do think that that's something that appealed to all of us when we met you at Heroes Con too, was that your art style, like, I think we saw it as something being so unique and so distinctly Tony McMillen. So kudos to you. I think you're definitely on that path, if not already there, right?
Thanks, man.
Yeah. Tony, are you gonna stick with illustrating moving forward, or do you still have plans? Do you have plans to go back to prose? And like, at what point in your creative process do you decide whether a book's going to be a graphic novel, a comic book, or a prose book?
Well, it's funny. Serious Creatures was a big decision like that, because basically the first thing of Serious Creatures was a 80-page prose story, a short story, a long short story, and that was the initial idea. All I had in that was basically the part with Bobby's working on a werewolf movie, and he's by himself in his little like RV, and he's going to masturbate, and then a werewolf comes out of the closet and scares the shit out of him, and he realizes it's a guy in a suit, takes a picture of him, that is loosely based on something that happened to me, kind of. So
wait, were you in the which book? Never mind.
Let's unpack this. Let's take a look.
This is pretty good. Okay?
You buy the book, you figure it out.
So I was 16. I was Halloween. I was done with Halloween. I was in my bedroom. I was going to masturbate because I'm 16. Sure. That's what I do. And I heard something in the closet, like a little sound. I was like, what? I was like, oh, dude, my God, it's Halloween. Just chill out, man. Like, you're like a little kid. You're scared of something. And I'm going back to what I'm going to do. And then the closet kicks open, and there's a werewolf mask I've never seen before. And it's snarling at me, and somebody's in the mask screaming at me. I'm like, oh, my God. And I'm like, oh, I'm naked. I got to cover it. I'm like freaked out in every way. And then I hear, stop playing with your pud, bud. And that's my stepdad. And he walks out, and I've been assassinated emotionally. There's nothing. I have nothing left. I'm like, he's just saw me at my lowest. There's nothing I can do. And I remember the next day, I was like, I'm not gonna get out and brush my teeth. I'm gonna wait until I hear his truck and he leaves. I can't face him. I'll be late to school. I don't care. And so I wait and finally get out there, and he's gone. And then also my mom comes around the corner. She sees me and just starts cracking up. She turns the corner. I'm like, oh my God, he told my mom. He fucking told my mom. Really? But the good news is, though, a year later, I caught him kind of. I was going. It was like late at night. I was going to go to the bathroom, and I thought I heard like a moan. Like, oh my God! And I looked in the living room, and he was watching some porn stuff. I was like, what? And he looked at me with a smile. I was like, and I was like, all right,
full circle, man.
It came around. So that was in Serious Creatures. Basically, I wrote a short story about that, and
wow.
Basically, after I did Lumen, my first comic I really drew and stuff, I was like, oh man, Serious Creatures. I was like, I want to do this. I want to do this as a book. And I was like, but maybe comic book would work. I was like, special effects are visual, obviously. And I kept thinking, I want to do something really surreal. And in prose, that's harder to pull off. You really have to make sure the reader has some grounding. They know what's happening. And I was like, well, I'll do like 5 pages of Serious Creatures as a comic to see if it works. And I did it, and I instantly knew, yes, this is much better. All of a sudden, it was working. Like the story stuff I was trying to write, I was like, just wasn't really singing to me. And I was like, no, this is it. This is the way to do it. And so moving forward, I think I'll probably write some other prose novels. I do know the next thing I write that will be mostly written word is I want to do a nonfiction book. And I think we'll have a lot of illustrations in it. I was thinking about how to do that. But I think like I did a podcast a couple of years ago called Too Young for This Shit, which is about an adolescence addicted to action. And so it's basically about growing up on action movies. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I think there's a book there. I have some thoughts, and I think it'll be action movies, it'll be comic books, and it'll be like aggro music, like gangster rap and metal and stuff I grew up with. I was like, but I think there's a weird nonfiction, like a funny book, but maybe some like heartfelt stuff in it. So I think that will happen eventually. I think my plan is I'll probably start a Patreon at some point and just kind of throw out some like chapters and see if it's working and kind of tool shed it that way.
Yeah, I mean, you're taking me back now to like my childhood, and you know, we might be like we might be like, because we're probably like 3 or 4 years apart, like between all of us, and so like I was born in the '80s and in the mid '80s and stuff, and like what you just said there, just like action movies, gangster rap, and metal, like that was my life growing up, and in the rise of practical effects. Comics I got into later in life, but like all the other pop culture stuff, like it's just a wave, and I just can't imagine. Like I look at my daughter now, who's like 11, and I'm seeing what she's intaking right now, and it's like it's a completely different world out there. So I just cannot imagine what her scene's going to be when she's 40.
Oh yeah,
you know, like the creators of her generation. What are they going to come up with? You know what I mean? Like, and the influences that they have. It's just going to be nuts, man. You ever think about that? Because I know you have kids too, or it's just insane what they're going to be dealing with when they're.
I embrace being more and more of a weird like bystander to society. Like it's not even knowing what's happening. It's like that's crazy. What are you guys talking about? I've never been in sync with like fashion and or music. I've always been like 10 years behind, and now I'm like 40 years behind. And it's kind of fun at this point. And also things are cyclical. So like 90s fashion is back, and now all these kids look like the kids I went to school with, which is really weird to me. And like they haven't learned our lessons. Like the pants are really huge and terrible. Like no,
the jinkos.
Yeah, that was a big mistake. We moved on. Don't do that. They're doing that. They're parting their hair down the middle like I used to. I was like, oh my god, man, no, you want to yeah, but no, they're gonna learn their own way. They're gonna learn their own hard lessons. But yeah, I have no idea what my kid's gonna be into. And it's kind of cool to, and I'm sure also technology wise, you know, she's the one who helped me upload my soul to the Matrix. I'll probably like mess it up. It's gonna be great. Can't wait.
It's gonna be great for sure. Well, I do want to take a look at some of your stuff. I have Attaboy here. We're going to switch over to a top down real quick and just kind of go through that real quick. I know you've dissected that a little bit, but we have some questions and want to show off some stuff and get your thoughts on a couple things.
Please,
so let's hop over to there, dude. How about that?
That's great.
All right, let's do it. All right, Tony, we got Attaboy here, which is the gateway drug for a lot of us to your work right here, the illustrated instructional booklet from Mag Cave. And what I wanted to ask you real quick about Attaboy was, I remember when I was doing Final Order Cutoff at my shop, and I knew who you were at that point, and I saw you had a book out from Mad Cave, but I haven't seen you put out anything from Mad Cave before. Can you give us a quick rundown on like what that relationship was like? How did that come to be, and do you see yourself, using them in the future?
Yeah, I like Mad Cave. I have a great experience. So basically, it's really I've been trying to get book deals through comics, and nothing's ever really happened. And so, what happened at the time was I actually got laid off my day job, and I was like, I'm gonna look for a real job. But in the meantime, I'm gonna try see if I get Attaboy a deal. And basically, at that point, Attaboy was almost 3 years old. I did a Kickstarter for it. It was a success, but I never found anyone to respond to like maybe publishing it in a more mainstream fashion. And so I wrote a new query letter, and apparently I got really good at writing query letters all of a sudden because I got some attention. I got this literary agent who was like, yeah, this is a really good book. And let's talk. We had a really nice Zoom chat. And the only thing about that agent was he's like, it's a little short. It's like 74 pages. What do you think about 200 pages? I was like making it 200 pages. I was like, I don't know, man. I was like, I can add a little bit. That's a lot. He's like, well, let's think about it. And so in the meantime, I was like, all right, I gotta see if someone else will take the book as is. And so eventually I reached out to Mad Cave, and they came back and they loved it. And I could tell everyone I spoke with had really read it, and they liked it as is. They dug it, and they said it'll be creator owned. And we had a really good talk over and over. We had a bunch of meetings, and the check cleared, and they're into it. And it was really nice because comics are a very lonely pursuit in a lot of ways. It's really nice to talk to a bunch of people who had actually read it, who actually got it, and believed in it. And even Mad Cave was like, we think the book's going to do fine, sales wise, but we really think it might be more of like a critical darling and might be a slow burn into getting a big audience. So we're okay with that. We're okay if it's like, it kind of slowly takes over and gets more and more readers, and word of mouth kind of spreads. I was like, okay, cool. So they were even like understanding that it might not be a smash out of the gate, which is really kind, actually.
Yeah.
There were so many things about this book that were just fantastic. Like, I mean, just in the, in us experiencing it and like kind of seeing that it existed, because I got to say, like, the trade dress, your artistic style, the colors, the way they pop, like, it is so eye catching. I remember all of us kind of going over FOC and going like, did you hear about this Attaboy book? Like, what is that? That looks interesting.
Oh, thank you. When I first did the book, I remember I was thinking about it, because the first edition is it's a treasury edition. It's huge. It's this thing. It's gigantic.
Right. Yep.
And so, yeah, just for comparison, it's like this. It's much bigger than that. Anyhow, I was like, I want this book to be an event. I remember Tarantino had this thing about, he did Jackie Brown, and he's like, I'm gonna do Kill Bill next, and he's like, I need to come back really hard. I want this movie to be like a rock concert. Like it's just like, you can't deny it. It's so much going on. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna do a big treasury edition. I want colors really big and bright. I want lots of big splashes, a lot of interesting stuff. I really wanted this to knock people's socks off, and and that's why I feel it's really, the book still holds up as a good entry to my work, because there's this like there's something to latch onto, I think, for no matter who you are, some weird stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And I know, just like the premise alone, which you've talked about before, about just this video game that nobody seems to remember but you, and even in your recollection of it, it's so like detailed throughout this book, and it turns, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many different layers to the book about, starting innocently with this game manual and this video game system, which I know, you did some research on this. Do you want to cover that real quick?
Yeah, there's no way that this is a happy coincidence, right? But the name of the game system, Hallucinaria, I had looked up, and it was like Latin for something along the lines of like, let the mind wander, or something like that. Am I correct or incorrect in that?
Yeah. It's actually, that's the word hallucination comes from the Latin root hallucinari. That's like the chain.
Okay.
So that's how we get there. Let the mind wander. And I have a prose novel called An Augmented Fourth, which is basically like Black Sabbath meets The Thing. And they're at the Hallucinari Hotel. And then in other novels I have, there's actually a group called the Hallucinari, which is kind of like an Illuminati, like a mysterious group who's pulling the strings of things. So I thought it'd be really fun to kind of throw that in there.
Right on.
Yeah, that was so good.
The world building is, like, just to echo Nick and Eric's point, the world building is one of my favorite parts of the comic. Particularly, I don't know, Nick, if you can go to it, the character page name, where you have the names of those characters was fantastic, man. Was there a highlight for you, just in all that world building and all the imagination you put into this? Was there something that you really enjoyed doing more than?
So I did love doing this stuff, right? And it's funny, like, this layout I stole from Jesse Lonergan, his book Hedra. He did a similar, or maybe it's exactly the same layout, but I was like, oh, I can use that for like all the villains and all the stuff. And I love doing bad pun names. I love the Venture Brothers, and they're like the masters of really bad puns. Yeah. Like, they had ones, it was like a orangutan, like harangue. I was like, that's good. That's genius. And so stuff like that is always fun. And especially, I love, the reason why I wanted to do video game manuals as a template was that those manuals gave you just enough story to make your imagination go wild. Like, you look at the Zelda manual, there's just a little tidbits about characters. There's not really full stuff, so you can kind of extrapolate what you want to. And so this book's kind of like that too. Like, there's little hints about weapons and items and different levels, and you can go, what is that like? What is Synth City like? What is the Graveyard Tomorrow exactly? You don't really know, but you can fill that in. And so I think having the reader as a co-conspirator is a smart move, because you might be able to fill out this book better than I could.
Yeah, and there's obviously so many references in here too. Like, who didn't do ass as their name? You know what I mean? Like, things like that. So it's just like brilliant that you thought about all. I mean, you could tell like that you were a child of like going to arcades and playing games, and like, there's a meta commentary in here that I'm still unpacking. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of cool stuff happening in here, but there's a lot of representations to video games, but obviously with Attaboy's life and with Scrapper and his parents, and then like the other kids in the yard. that we're talking to here that have experience like playing the game and whatnot, but all the upgrades and how they're just represented, it's just such a smart way of like, not only illustrating like what the character's going through in real time in the story, but also like a representation of life itself and trials and tribulations, trying and trying again, repeating the same mistakes over again, expecting a different result. You know, I don't know, just taking the advice of others and just trying to overcome your own obstacles and maybe your own upbringing and the relationships with your parents and stuff. There's just so much stuff in this book, man. And I just don't know how you made it all work. It's just, it's really, really breathtaking. So just kudos on that.
Thank you very, very much. I think the book does work, but it is a weird thing. It's when I was making it, I was kind of like, yeah, I don't know. I think I'm gonna land this, but I don't really have a lot of things that are exactly like this.
Yeah.
And I remember it's funny, I can remember this making the book. I was like, I hope this emotional kind of autobiographical stuff doesn't ruin this book for people. And eventually I was like, no, that's what made the book. That's luckily that's why the book has something, because it has something to say. But it was kind of a little bit of a weird gamble, because I was like, maybe people just want like a weird Mandela effect Mega Man thing. Maybe they don't want the other part. But I was like, well, I don't want that. And so ultimately I had to please myself. And it's like, I got something to say. And it's funny, someone Roman, who does the Uncle Jerk YouTube station. He's a really really smart guy. Yeah, he likes my work, and he's very insightful. He's like, you know, your work's always about masks. I was like, oh my god, it really is.
Yeah.
I didn't exactly think of that, but yeah, Serious Creatures, the guy makes masks. Attaboy, a lot of it is about his mask of his human mask over his machine face, and even Lumen, my first book, the character's mask is a big part of it. And I was like, masks are very interesting. Identity is very interesting. Like what are masks? And story is mask. I'm masking my own story with all these kind of fantastical elements and these different characters who aren't me, but like Serious Creatures. It's about Spawn and my sister, but in that book, it's about something else. And I think that's interesting. I think storytelling might be masks. And so I've always been, I don't know. So him saying that, I was like, oh yeah, Attaboy's all about masks too. God, you're right. You figured me out.
No, I was just going to say, I love the colors in this one and the palette you use. What is your approach when it comes time to color a book? Is this like, do you have a general approach you use for all your books, or does it vary from one to the next?
Thank you. It varies slightly, but this is actually where I crystallized it. So, actually, Serious Creatures in this. So basically, when I did Lumen, I was still digital color, and I was using Photoshop, and I was just using a mouse, and it was really like painstaking. But when I did Serious Creatures, I think issue 2, I got like a Procreate out of an iPad Pro little tablet, and I realized, okay, I want this to look analog, and so I start using crayon and watercolor digital brushes to kind of create that. And I always like limited color. I think the smart move is to have less to fuck up. You have only so many choices. You can't overcomplicate it. I never liked rendering with computer colors. I think that, especially for my kind of style, I think it does a disservice. There's so many artists who I love who their more modern work is colored in ways I don't enjoy, like John Romita Jr., Frank Miller, stuff like that. I'm like, no, you need flat colors or something else, or watercolor, something else. And if Attaboy was cool about this one, it's like, okay, this is a pop book. This is a colorful, bright world. Let's go nuts. And so like Serious Creatures, the coloring influence, one of the big ones is my favorite colorists are like Lynn Varley, Michelle Fife, and Tom Scioli, and a few other, and Steve Olaf. But like with Serious Creatures, I got into Basil Gogos, who does all the famous Monsters magazine covers, the paintings. He did like the Rob Zombie's Hellbilly Deluxe cover. His big thing is like, it looks like a oil spill, a rainbow, right? Like it's just kind of like dirty but still colorful. And this, I use that a lot as like it's okay to have emotional colors that aren't really conveying the actual color of the scene, but it's showing you, oh, this is anger, this is passion, this is cold and chill. And so I really kind of went for it with this one, I think.
Yeah, dude, it definitely shows. Like one of my favorite parts about this book. Oh yeah, dude. Like one of my favorite parts about this book, though, is the way that you kind of conceptualize the mechanics of a video game and how you reconceptualize that in regard to like the hero's journey aspect of the story. Like Nick, if you could find like the jumping mechanics pages. I love it so much how you use the jumping mechanic, which is absolutely part of the instruction manual, and it's always that first level in any NES game that you actually play. But how that like so you totally like turn it on its head by the end of the story and make it something totally unique. Like talk about that aha moment for you. Like how did that come to be?
I'm trying to remember exactly, but I know at some point, like I don't know much about the tarot at all, right? But I know some of the big cards, right? And so one of them is the Fool. The Fool card is famously he has a foot off the precipice, like right there. And I was like, yeah, this is like the Fool's actually it's a good card. You're the start of a journey, and that's how you do. You might make a misstep, that's how it begins.
Yep.
And so I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then I was thinking about, well, I got to do like a video game. Usually the first level is it'll show you how to jump, how to shoot your gun or whatever you got. I was like, I got to do that. And then I was like, I remembered as a kid being really frustrated at some games. And sometimes like I'd be playing Mario and I had like 30 lives saved up. But I'd be pissed off and I couldn't figure something out. And so I just kill myself over and over and over again, just out of spite.
Yeah.
And like I was gonna hurt the game. Like I'm hurting myself. I'm just like, but I do that, and I'm like, oh my god, it'd be cool if like you were just jumping off a cliff, and all of a sudden you didn't die, and you're like, why? And then I was like, oh, it's like a pile of your old lives. And I was like, oh my, and then the symbology of that kind of hit me. I was like, whoa, what does that meant? This. And then it's the Golgotha dead boy robots, and then all these things, and I was like, oh my god, that'd be cool. And then I think eventually I was like, the book's got to open with him falling, which is sets up later on in the book. And then eventually that took me to like, I was like, because I didn't know at that point. I was like, how is he going to? I didn't know how he's going to get out of the game to achieve the next state of existence. I was like, well, you gotta go up, right? He's gone down. Yep. You gotta go up. And I was like, how do you get up? And then eventually I was like, oh my god, like he's got to build a fucking rocket out of his like little boots and all his parts, all these dead attaboys. I was like, what is that even? It's like a weird dream. It's like I was like half guiding it and half like it was just guiding myself. And I was like, yeah, him and Scrap are gonna do this. That's weird and potent. That's crazy.
Yeah. And it's also set up in the very beginning, right? So like you're introduced to these powers, right? And you could take it however you want. That's what I love about the story. You could take it at face value, or you can take it as, you know, you're developing all these skills throughout your life and you're applying them, but you might not know how to make them all work together cohesively, holistically. You know what I mean? And over time, you learn that through a series of mistakes. Like these are the things that I pull out of stories like this that I feel like are just like perfect, and they're great analogs.
You're totally right, Nick. And it's funny. That's what was happening to me in live time making the book in a lot of ways. Like one of my first memories of art is me and my friend Jackson Barber would draw our video games we make up in our heads. We draw the levels and draw the characters out, and like magic marker and pencil and crayon and all this, and we staple them together. And this is the manual. And eventually, I did this like in a slightly higher level with this book. And I did that when I was like 8, 9 years old. This kid. That's why the book's dedicated to him. And I've never talked to him since. That was like, I looked for him on Facebook. I don't know what he's doing.
Man. Yeah.
But I was like, I don't know. It'd be kind of cool if like he'd reach out. But it's funny, all these little things you do, you have no idea what you're going to use that for later. And if you look, you'll probably jigsaw away and find a way to use it. And the book's weird. The book's a really weird book. Like it's almost kind of spiritual in some parts, and it's very mysterious, and it's also tons of fun. Like, you know, there's the ass joke, there's goofy stuff, and and I think it's almost like in art, if you make things silly or fun, it's actually better to then lace in anything serious you want to talk about. It's like when you tell a joke at a funeral, everyone's has so much tension. It'll land better usually. It means more. It's more surprising. And I find that art too. Like there's some documentary about the Pixies, and someone said something like actually I think it was a guy from Bush. The guy, I don't really like Bush the band, but Gavin Rossdale was like, he's like, the Pixies album Doolittle showed me that important art does not have to be serious. And he's like talking about the song. He says the lyric is Uriah hit the crapper. He hit the crapper. It's like, that song's amazing. That lyric is nonsense and funny. But like, you can do both, and that's totally cool, and actually might even work to your advantage.
Yeah, for sure, man. And I remember when I was at your table, I was flipping through some of your original art, and I was able to snag this piece right here from you. As soon as I was flipping through your portfolio, I'm like, that's the thing from the book and the guy. You know what I mean? So I'm like, oh hell yeah, grab this one's mine, man. So yeah, it's a great. It sets up a great story because Attaboy, you know, he's self-aware, but he's also a machine, and he's learning how to deal with that. You know what I mean? Between Motherboard, his mom, and his dad, Dr. Atta, and so it's like he's just trying to figure things out. And this is a great representation of like the duality of that. You know, obviously he's got like this more person. He's got his mask on. He's dealing with all that. He's trying to figure out, but at the core, he's a machine as well. And you can see like this wreckage and this kind of like story being told around him too. So like it was a great like no-brainer piece as soon as I saw it, you know. So awesome visualization here.
Thank you. It's one of my favorite pages. Like, it's funny that there's a whole sequence there with like this part, and then eventually the death of Dr. Atta. That's some of my favorite stuff. The whole book, and a lot of it's kind of silent. This has some description in it, but I think that's
right.
Making the book, I was looking forward to drawing this page in particular, and then it's when things start really clicking. I think so. When I make comics, I usually do things in linear fashion. I'll start page 1 and just keep going. I know some people kind of do they jump around. I like to do this way because a lot of times I'll change my mind and I'll improvise. And so you know, I gotta do page 4 first because I might improvise and change things. So page 6 is gonna be totally different than my thumbnail said or whatever. Yeah. So this way, that's the way I usually work. But this is when the book started. Like I go, oh man, that's interesting. And writing Attaboy is interesting because like Serious Creatures is very literary and there's a lot of conversation. So that one, there's more of a real script of dialogue. And this book, there was some, and then sometimes I'm like, I think this and this happened. Let's just find out. I got 6 pages to get here to there. Let's see what happens. And it was very loose. It was very jazz.
Yeah. Well, I just ate it up. It was brilliant. So this was definitely one of my showcase pieces coming out of Heroes for sure.
It's such a love letter to 90s video games. I just love all the elements of it. Like you can tell like immediately when you start reading it that just the way you have the levels set up, and you know you gotta wait for the game to reveal itself to you, and just like the him and Scrapper reminded me of Sonic and Tails, like the little back and forth. You know what I mean? It's like I love the buddy, and then like the certain levels look like Mario. I just I don't know. I loved how you use that nostalgia to also deal with like you know the issues with your parents and your dad and stuff like that. I thought that was just a very profound way to tell that story.
Thanks a lot. It's funny. I think for people our age, and I think younger people too, but video games are sort of this. People don't realize how often you spend so much time playing these games, and they are stories, and I think they become part of your of your mind, and I think of things sometimes in video game terms. And I don't really play games anymore. I might play some old retro games, and every once in a while I'll play like an emulator of an old Nintendo game. But I guess I don't know. I think I'm not as good as I used to be, and or something, or the games are just too complex. But as a kid and a teenager, those games are really important to me, and also important to me as a storyteller. There are parts of like Ninja Gaiden and Mega Man and Zelda I still think about as storytelling. Like, but the characters and the weird ideas and the stories, I'm like, oh man, that's awesome. I want to do something like that. And even the art that was in the manuals, I thought was really cool. And I think that's always been a part of me. Like Castlevania 3, I think about all the time. Dracula's Curse, and like this that was
there's
really fun stage.
That
was really fun to actually map out a stage and go on this. And I actually took it really seriously. Cool, I was like, you can't do this unless he does that. And like, it doesn't matter, but it was fun to get lost in it.
It reminds me of like Metroid, right? Like it has a very Metroid vibe to it too. Like a lot of those games did back then, those platformers that were like space aged. Those were cool. I remember pounding my head against the wall trying to beat Battletoads. Oh my God. Like that game drove me crazy. Specifically the bike level where you have to like dodge all the lasers and stuff. I'm like, come on.
That ruined a generation of people. That just it just broke their hearts.
But it had the best pause music in the world. Right? Music in the world. Right?
Oh, that is so true.
Oh, the best. I still play it to this day.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Thanks.
Good call.
Cool. Yeah. Remarkable book, man. So thank you so much for that. Looking forward to many other books that you might collaborate even with Mad Cave and anything else you got going on. We're super excited about Serious Creatures and everything too. So just congratulations on the success of the book.
Oh, right on. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. I did want to show off a couple things. You actually participated in this little charitable thing too. So when I brought this over to HeroesCon, this is a donation piece for Comics Curing Cancer. You talked about earlier about doing skulls and figuring out how to do glasses and whatnot on there. But I mean, I think you figured it out, man.
What's crazy is like I saw your guys' like post heroes like video, and this is featured in that. And I was like, oh my god! When I was drawing this, I saw Fife and I saw some other big names and Jim Mahfood and all these guys. But Rick Leonardi, right?
Yeah, he copped your stuff right here. Yeah, he went right around you.
And I was like, oh my god! I had a subscription to Spider-Man 2099 as a kid.
Yeah,
I had a subscription to that and Morbius, and I was like, that was one of my character Lumen, his design is very reminiscent of Spider-Man 2099's mask and stuff. I was like, oh my god, I'm right next to him. That's fucking crazy. I'm sure Rick is also like, oh my god, Tony McMillen's right there next. Oh god, I did it.
I'm sure he was.
I arrived, but
yeah, but yeah. It was so cool you did that. Speaking of 2099, yeah, so we got him right there.
Yes,
so
that's one of my favorite designs. Yeah,
and of course we have you again. So. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's my version of Spider-Man.
Yep. Oh, I love Daredevil.
Yeah, Daredevil's
he's the best.
Well, I figured out how I just figured out how I like to draw Venom. So now when I posted Venom, people are like, "Oh, there's the Joker." I'm like, "No, this is Venom." I'm like, "Oh shit!" It's like really.
I fell for it.
Yeah.
What a cool thing to stumble upon! Just that meme, you know, that's just so fun.
Well, I might, it's funny. Marty's Spider-Man bootleg is awesome.
Sure.
I was like, maybe my version will just be this. It'll just be like my Batman. And I know I gotta figure it out, but it'd be really fun to do that, just to take it another level up.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely got to get that. Definitely got to get some of those prints. Your Spider-Man, Batman print. So yeah, we got to figure out a way to get a copy of that. So
yeah,
cool, man. Well, thanks for letting us do a little deep dive on Attaboy, man. That was really fun. Thank you so much.
Of course, yeah, thank you.
Tony, what do you have coming up in the future? Anything you're working on currently? I know the Serious Creatures Kickstarter is wrapping up, but are you working on anything you got coming out soon?
Yeah, I'm actually I'm working on issue 2 of this new project now, but it's called Destroying Angel Lumen. And so the idea is this is a sequel to my first book, Lumen, but I'm approaching it kind of like Road Warrior or Evil Dead 2, where it's almost like a remake in its own way. This could be your first Lumen book, and you'll be totally fine. And it's gonna be really nuts. It's super action packed, and the idea of Lumen is basically there's a world of endless night, which I called Noctera, which is I did that before Scott Snyder's thing, so we're going to figure it out in court. No, but it's a world of endless night, and so the hero is this guy wearing this special kind of suit that and he has a lantern as a weapon, and the suit runs on lumen, which is like this sort of like bioluminescent algae that grows on the outside of the world. And this is the only source of heat and light in the world. And he fights all these mushroom monsters, and it's a really almost like H.R. Giger meets Adventure Time kind of vibe. It's real weird. I did the first book, Lumen, it was almost like 7 years ago. And so Destroying Angel Lumen, he's got this new adversary who's called the Destroying Angel, who looks almost like the sinew armor from Bram Stoker's Dracula, the red thing, meets like Mephistopheles or maybe even the Batman 66 car because it's black and red. He looks fucking awesome. He looks like a Merciful Fate album cover come to life. So he's going to fight this guy. After doing Serious Creatures, I was like, I wanted to do action, like lots of action, lots of kinetic stuff. And so there's going to be 4 issues, all 48 pages each. It's going to be a nuts story. That's going to be the next big project, and I'm really looking forward to that. But I got a couple other things I'm working on, and one of them will be, I think it's going to be, I was like, after doing Attaboy, I was like, I like the Attaboy is a very unique book in the way it's told. And I was like, I'd like to do that again, but it has to be organic. I have to think of another weird way. And I just kind of put that in the back burner. And so I think I finally stumbled upon the way. And I want to do a book. Like, I'm a huge fan of those Alex Toth animation books they put out, you know? And also, I love all the Jack Kirby animation pitches he did. I was like, oh, it'd be really cool to tell a story where the whole book is like a collection of some fictional cartoonist's animation pitches, and they start telling one big weird story. And these are the things that did not get sold. And so I'm thinking the working title is called The Unsold Izzy Spinoza. And it's this guy who's like, he got kind of Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko out of a job in comics, and he got tired of getting ripped off, and he goes to animation, and he has some really kind of surreal, weird ideas. And it's going to be the correspondence between him and the editors, and the actual art he submits and the comics he submits is the story. And so that's something I'm slowly working on. Thanks. It'll be a real challenge. but I think if I pull it off, it'll be really weird and really special.
Dude, knowing the amount of like love and care you put behind like the notion of video games and 80s movies and special effects, I can only imagine that, you know, that the combination of you and animation telling that story is going to be fantastic. That's like really exciting.
That means a lot to me. Thank you. Yeah, that's the idea. Exactly. I wanted to put nothing but care into it, and even maybe try to draw on different styles to kind of emulate different era, and it's also a good place. It's a good place to put all my bad pun ideas. I have like tons of stuff. Like I won't ever do a comic of like, you know, Gilgamesh, but I'm like, oh, I'll put that as a pitch. Like sure, Gilgamesh could be a totally thing. You know, that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Get your Stan Lee on.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Tony, man, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure speaking with you. It was awesome meeting you like a month ago and everything. But thank you so much for letting us pick your brain, take a look at some of your work more, and just get to know you better, man. Thank you so much.
Dude, thank you guys. It's a total pleasure. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Take it easy, man. See you.